Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a real honor to be speaking before your group.
Thank you for inviting me. I hear the honor to speak.
I'm delighted that you invited me here to talk about the history of Greenpeace and the power of bearing witness. A lot of people consider Greenpeace to be a bunch of radical hippies saving the whales, but many people don't know that we actually got our start on environmentalism confronting a much greater injustice, the injustice of nuclear testing by the United States government.
People think we are enemies in a group, and we really
Greenpeace was founded back in 1971 up in Vancouver, Canada, by a group of Americans and Canadians. At that time, the United States was testing nuclear weapons below the surface of an island called Amchitka. Amchitka is one of the Aleutian Islands, which trail down off the coast of Alaska, and it lies some 2,500 miles due west of Vancouver, Canada. Back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, the U.S. government created a huge tunnel underneath Amchitka and placed multi-kiloton nuclear weapons in that tunnel to conduct nuclear tests. After the first test was detonated, the Richter scales in Vancouver in Western Canada registered an earthquake of around 6.4, and so many people in Canada were very concerned about continued testing by the U.S. government. There were huge rallies all over Western Canada, thousands of people marching through the streets of Vancouver holding signs. Actually, some of the borders between the United States and Canada were shut off by protests. But these protests fell on deaf ears, as most of the decisions were being made way back in Washington, D.C. by bureaucrats and folks in the Pentagon. The tests never subsided. And it wasn't until a small group of people, calling themselves originally the Don't Make a Wave Society, decided to take direct action that anything really substantive came about. They were calling themselves the Don't Make a Wave Society because many people feared that because Amchitka lies on an earthquake fault line in the middle of the ocean, that these massive explosions underground would trigger huge earthquakes and tidal waves, and that those tidal waves would have the possibility of wiping out Vancouver. Thank goodness they changed their name a little on down the road to Greenpeace. I don't know whether I'd be working today, 20 years later, for the Don't Make a Wave Society, but I'm pleased to be working for Greenpeace. I don't think it's an accident that we were given the name Greenpeace, combining two of the most powerful images, one of ecology and one of peace and disarmament, into one very powerful symbol, something that states that disarmament is an ecological issue, that war is damaging to the environment as well as human life. And so Greenpeace was born. Greenpeace was founded by a couple of Americans who were in Canada at the time, keeping their children out of the Vietnam War. They had witnessed war themselves, and they did not want their sons to be drafted and go to Vietnam. The rest of the folks were actually Canadians, and it was their idea to actually sail a ship to Amchitka. They called it bearing witness. Bearing witness is a philosophy that comes to Greenpeace from the Quakers. And the Quakers believe that when you see an injustice taking place, that you have a responsibility for that injustice, that you cannot turn away in ignorance. And you have a fundamental choice to make. You can decide to do nothing and accept the responsibility of your own inactions, or you can decide to act against the injustice, to take nonviolent, direct action to confront the injustice. Greenpeace is founded on bearing witness to environmental injustices. And if you agree with Greenpeace, you'd consider there to be no greater injustice than a nuclear detonation on the face of the earth, no greater assault to our mother planet. So those folks decided to charter a ship and sail it to the test zone. They were completely unorganized at the time. They had almost no money. And so they had to quickly come together around this issue to organize themselves and to raise enough money to actually charter a ship. Now you can imagine when you're going around the ports of Vancouver, the different harbors, and you're telling people the truth that you want to borrow their ship to sail it into a nuclear test zone during a scheduled blast, you're probably not going to have your choice of the very best ships in the harbor. It took them over a year to get any ship at all, and they finally settled on a ship called the Phyllis Cormac, which was owned by an older fishing gentleman who had fallen on bad times for a number of years. So they contracted the ship for 6 weeks and paid him $15,000 for his services, and he actually agreed to come with them to Amchitka. The money was provided by some Sierra clubs in the West Coast, as well as a benefit concert played by Joni Mitchell and James Taylor. When they finally got around to taking off for Amchitka, it had become late fall, and it was a very dangerous time to be up in the northern Pacific in late fall, and none of them were sailors, so it was a really difficult voyage for all of them to make. What they did before they left the harbor was probably the most important thing of their entire direct action, and that was to hold a press conference, letting the media gathered from all over the world know what their intentions were.
They were trying to let the world know what was it.
They said that they would sail their ship to Amchitka to bear witness, to be there as the bomb went off. They weren't sure what kind of risk they were undertaking, whether there would be radioactivity vented from the test itself, whether there would be an earthquake in rough seas. And so they were taking a huge chance. They set out on their way, and about halfway up to Amchitka, they stopped in a Kwakiutl Indian fishing village. The Kwakutls invited the founding members of Greenpeace there to one of their longhouses, and in a Native American ceremony, Greenpeace was given the totem of the Kwakutl Indians. The totem is two orca whales or killer whales coming together in a circle, the circle of life. And it's a totem that Greenpeace uses to this day. It exists on all of our 7 ships around the world protecting the oceans. They also told the original members of Greenpeace a story of a Cree Indian woman, a prophet named Eyes of Fire. And this Cree woman named Eyes of Fire prophesied of a time when the world would be at the state of collapse. She said that the environmental destruction would be so great that the rivers would literally run red with the blood of the deer, and that fish would float to the shores of the oceans. She said at that time the red people would have completely lost all sense of balance and connection with the earth. And she said at that time the red races, the red nations would regain their respect for the earth and teach the white races and the other races of the rainbow respect and balance for Mother Earth, and that warriors of the rainbow would gather from all directions to protect our mother planet. And that is why we call our flagship to this day the Rainbow Warrior. We've actually, we're working on our 2nd Rainbow Warrior. The first Rainbow Warrior was literally blown up by French secret agents in Auckland, New Zealand back in 1986 when it was protesting French nuclear testing on the Moroa Atoll in the South Pacific. Getting back to the original voyagers at the Kwakutl Indian village, they left the village and proceeded towards Amchitka due west. And they were stopped about a day away from the test range itself by U.S. Customs and the U.S. Coast Guard. And they were hauled back and sent back to Vancouver. thinking that they had been utterly defeated. They were returning; their spirits were very low. And what they found actually when they